Hi, everybody. Just as you're joining, thanks for joining us for Co-op Month and the second webinar in our series on housing co-ops in Maine. And today's topic is maintaining and growing existing housing co-ops. We're just going to wait one more minute and then we'll get started. All right. Welcome, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Chris Linder. I'm with the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast. Um, and I'll be the facilitator today for today's webinar. And we're so excited for you all to come to the second session for Co-op Month on housing co-ops in Maine. The previous session went really well around startup co-ops, and you can actually get the recording at this point. Today's topic is maintaining and growing existing housing co-ops. And we have a great panel with us today. All three are from Maine, but have very different stories and how they got involved in the cooperative world. And I think I'll go ahead and just get everybody started. And I will ask, there will be time for Q&A at the end. Do go ahead and chat in your questions and we'll have someone monitoring those. And this will be as you probably heard, this will be recorded, and you can be able, there will be resources and the recording to share out with your colleagues as well. So first, I'd like to invite Craig Saddlemire from Raise Up Housing Co-op in Lewiston. And just a little bit of a prompt for our panelists is, introducing yourselves both in what you're doing now in your role and your connection to co-ops or not, but also your origin story. Like how did you all three of you have great stories around how you got involved in affordable housing and in particular housing co-ops. So yeah, so Craig, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. So my name is Craig Saddlemire. I'm the Cooperative Development Organizer for the Raise Up Housing Cooperative. We are Maine's oldest urban multi-unit housing cooperative in the state. We've been around since 2008. We have 15 cooperatively owned units across 3 apartment buildings. And then we have 2 new construction buildings that the funding sources, we are slowly trying to cooperatize our 2 new buildings, but existing funding sources make that challenging. We can get more into why that is later in the discussion, perhaps. But my story in terms of how I got involved in cooperative housing was I've been in Lewiston since 2001. I got involved in a lot of community organizing in 2004 to stop some bad urban renewal projects that were just proposing to demolish blocks of low income housing in the community. And that sort of issue introduced me to a lot of folks. I moved in with a roommate who was living in a building that was owned by a nonprofit developer at the time that was actually marketing this thing as a housing cooperative. But they had not figured out how to make it a housing cooperative yet. So it was just rental property. I moved in with him. And after a year or so, the nonprofit entity that owned the building was giving up and saying, "All right, I guess we don't actually know how to make this a housing cooperative. It's just going to be rental housing now." But that was my first exposure to the idea. I was like, "Wow, the idea of my friends and I actually like controlling an apartment building together sounds great." And we started to, look around the neighborhood and organize ourselves. And we also came upon a good program that was called a individual development account program. But basically, a program to help people buy their first home. And we realized we could pool our benefit from that program as like a bunch of individuals. We could like pool that money together and have a bigger impact to buy an apartment building together that we could afford, much more so than we could afford to buy single family homes. So we found our first building. It was a 3-unit apartment building that became my home for 17 years on Maple Street in Lewiston. We formed a limited equity housing cooperative where the buy-in cost was about $6,000 per unit. We had below market rent. And we were young. We were like in our early 20s. We learned a lot over the course of 5 years from that experience, and had a lot of folks that wanted to see cooperative housing grow in the community. We hadn't seen any other housing co-ops start, so we decided to actually sort of professionalize the work, and we started a new housing cooperative with new, broader, more diverse leadership from the neighborhood. Merged the old co-op with that one, and that was in 2015, and that's when it actually became my full-time job rather than just a volunteer sort of self-managed effort. We bought our second building and then the subsequent year, our third building, and have continued to grow from there. And presently, we are focused on offering technical support. We're less in the developing our own real estate mode. We're offering technical support to other housing co-ops in the state so that they can do the same thing.
Awesome, Craig. Thanks. And yeah, I personally am excited you all are doing that because that's really been a gap. And I'll introduce Pat Schwebler now, who does provide great TA to resident-owned communities in particular. So Pat, same question, what you do now, but also your origin story, and maybe because resident-owned communities are very particular, maybe just a quick definition on what a ROC is and how it's different from how Craig's model in Lewiston. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. My name is Pat Schwebler, and I am the New England Resident-Owned Community Co-Program Director. I also, as Chris mentioned, I do serve some communities right here in Maine as their technical advisor. Basically, a resident-owned community in our term is a manufactured home park that has been put on the market, and the residents band together and decide if they want to try to purchase the land under their units or they might opt not to. So CDI, the NEROC program, helps residents by educating them on the process. And if they collectively come together and vote to move forward, we take them through the whole acquisition process, help them obtain financing, and then stay on afterwards to help them with the technical advisement. I was drawn to this work. I'm originally from Connecticut. I am not an official Mainer. However, I've lived here for 32 years. I consider Maine my adopted home state. I absolutely love it here and the people we serve. But in Connecticut, I worked as a realtor for over a decade in Danbury, Connecticut, which was a very urban area. I noticed early on in my real estate career that new immigrants to America were being ignored. Realtors in general were not giving them the time of day because their focus tended to be first-time buyers. And while they might back then have only been able to afford $100,000, where a more traditional buyer that had been in the U.S. for a while was looking at $300,000 homes. So this was a market that was not being addressed at all. And personally, I believe that everyone has the right to shelter. I believe it's a human right. And if somebody is so moved to try to purchase their first home, I wanted to help them with that. So back then, there was no internet and no nonprofits serving first-time buyers. So you couldn't Google, how do I buy a new home as a new citizen to the U.S.? So I created a first-time homebuyer program for new immigrants, and I thought it would just be a one-time only presentation, and it ended up becoming an annual event in Danbury, Connecticut. And I was very happy to do that work. And it was very rewarding. When I moved to Maine 32 years ago, I became affiliated with Caring Unlimited, which is an amazing organization in York, Maine that helps victims, I should say survivors of domestic violence. I served as their board chair. And during that time, the board and the staff wanted to create transitional housing for survivors of domestic violence. And we were very fortunate. I helped create a strategic plan, and grant funding became available. And we were able to create transitional housing for survivors of domestic violence. And we went from 2 units to 20 in about 18 months. So that was very rewarding. Fast forward a little bit, I founded a food co-op that was the monthly order food co-op that you do out of your garage. So I ran that for about 10 years and in Kennebunk, and that was terrific. I transitioned after living here for quite a while. I became executive director of a small nonprofit that served the elderly in the York County area. And then I had been in banking, and I was a mortgage loan officer, and that kind of played off my real estate experience. And I found my way to CDI, the Cooperative Development Institute, and was inspired to join the NEROC team, primarily because my best friend from childhood lived in a manufactured home park. And she was just out of high school, newly married. She had her first child, and then she got notice that in 60 days she had to remove her unit because her park was being sold to the neighboring gravel bank owner. So he could basically excavate the park for gravel. And it was very difficult to watch what she went through as her best friend and the stress it created. So she had a loan on her home. And she was basically told she had 60 days to find a new location or her unit would be destroyed. So that was over 30 years ago in Newtown, Connecticut. And when this opportunity came up at CDI, I was motivated to join and be part of the NEROC team. Thank
That's
you.
awesome. Yeah, that's awesome, Pat. Thanks so much. Yeah, Julian, take it away. Julian, you are not directly involved in co-ops anymore, and we miss you in the co-op world, but you're doing great work. And so, yeah, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Really grateful to be here. Thanks for the invitation and to be in the room with friends too. So, yeah, Julian, Rowand, I use he and they pronouns. I work currently with Maine Initiatives. I'm a senior director there, oversee a few of our programs that are all participatory grant-making programs. So without getting too much into it, there's actually a lot of overlap and a lot of things that I've learned from co-ops and membership meetings and collective decision making, which is really at the core of my work now, right? How do we get together collectively to make decisions about things that are really important to us and resources, and also deal with all of the interpersonal things that come along with that too. So a lot of overlap. But yeah, happy to share a little bit about my connection to co-ops, and it's certainly deep. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and Pat, your story that you just shared, there's a lot of resonance with how I got connected to co-ops, which was I was living in apartment units in Washington, D.C. Well, was born there, and my mother and other neighbors received eviction notices. So this is back in 1977. My sister and I have a twin sister. We were one years old, so I don't remember this myself, but they got eviction notices and they organized and they were able to purchase the buildings on the block that were going to get torn down, and there was going to be a high rise put up. But there was some support from the DC government at that time for affordable housing. So they organized, raised the funds, purchased the buildings. And that's Beecher Cooperative, and was the first limited equity housing co-op in DC, and it's still going strong with really strong reserves. It's 6 buildings, 64 units. And my mother was the resident manager there for 40 years or so. I was doing various things, including organizing after college, and moved back to Washington, D.C. I believe it was in 2014 when she was ready to retire and was took over as the resident manager. I was doing sort of housing organizing in the Bay Area and felt like it was important to do that work at home. So I took over as the resident manager, which was also a great learning too, of like walking in my mother's shoes, and got to appreciate how much work it was to do that in a different way that you just don't realize as a kid. I mean, I knew that, you know, we had jobs like handing out the newsletter to all the members, right? So I did have jobs as a kid, but I got a fuller sense. Um, and it was a great experience also being back there. There were people that were there, could age in place at that housing co-op. So there were members there that I knew as a kid, and their kids then had moved back to the co-op. These were small 1-bedroom apartments, but in Northwest Washington, D.C., to have that affordable housing preserved was really huge for a lot of people, and a very diverse population, a lot of exchange students there as well. Um, and it's remained affordable, so continues to be a limited equity housing co-op. So I managed the co-op for about 4 years, and then moved to Maine. My sweetheart lives here, and had convinced me to move up. Wasn't hard. I mean, it's really beautiful here. And so, and I was really fortunate to connect with CDI when I moved here, the Cooperative Development Institute, and started working with the NEROC program. And I think Craig's probably one of the first people I reached out to as somebody who understands co-ops here in Maine. So really grateful for Craig's advice and support doing that work. And so, yeah, I worked with NEROC for about a year and a half and stayed on the CDI board afterwards. And then got the job that I'm currently doing at Maine Initiatives, also doing organizing, but really loved the work that I did with CDI and the manufactured housing communities. And yeah, just grateful to be a part of this conversation today. Yeah, a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thanks, Julian. I got chills throughout you all's stories. I had heard them before, but even better today. Thank you. Thank you all for being here and sharing. So wanted to start off with questions to you all, and leading from last week's or 2 weeks ago session on startups. It's almost the easy part, like getting, it's not easy, but you get all excited and you have lots of energy, you buy the place, you move in, and then what? There's a lot of work to be done. And for housing co-ops in particular, versus other co-ops that are generally businesses and have employees, a lot of housing co-ops, it's all volunteer. So everybody's got their day job and are volunteering their time to get all this stuff done, the finances, the maintenance, finding new residents, all of that. Often, not always, sometimes, Pat, you can probably talk about property managers later, but what are, for you all, both in your learning of the doing, but also now that you reflect back, what are key priorities for the first, maybe we can split into a two-part question. What are the key priorities for the first 6 months or so, just to kind of get comfortable and focus on the right things, and also for the first couple of years, what are some areas that you all would prioritize? And I think I'll call on Craig, you first, kind of go in the same order, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. So, for the first 6 months, you're basically gonna be meeting pretty frequently, I think, as you are just troubleshooting stuff. I mean, you're just probably learn if it's a situation where you're moving to a new building, which was the case for us when we started. There's a lot that you're learning, that the inspection didn't figure out. So plan on kind of a heavy meeting frequency, definitely at least monthly, um, and more as needed to be developing your systems in terms of, practicing decision making, figuring out how you're going to, when a subject involves more work between the meetings, how are you assigning that? Whether it's with, I mean, if you're a really small co-op, then it's probably one individual that's going to work on it, or maybe two individuals. If you're a bigger co-op, then maybe you're making a committee. Um, and I think really staying on top of getting into a good habit of how you review your financials. Is your treasurer doing that? Are you just doing it all as a group at your meeting together? But sort of figuring out that system, uh, making sure who's paying the bills, making sure the bills are getting paid, making sure it's documented, making sure your financials are accurate and up to date, and just sort of getting into the practice of that. And through there's different ways to approach cooperative housing. For some folks, they start more from the social side, and I think that's really important. I mean, it's essential that you're also developing, you're engaging in activities, whether they're just purely sort of leisure, recreational, or whether they're just functionally running the co-op. But always be looking at opportunities to be building trust amongst each other, because that trust is going to carry you through the harder times when those come, and they will. I can't tell you how hard they'll be, but I can tell you that you will have hard times, running your housing co-op together. So looking for opportunities to do that trust building. And I find that oftentimes in just kind of working on the functional stuff together, at least as a starting point, working on those projects sort of inherently, you start to build trust together. But organizing community meals is the simplest thing, have breaking bread together, and trying to organize a few other fun social events that bring that everyone agrees is a good thing to do and brings them together, I think is a good way to start things off in your first 6 months. And maybe,
Awesome.
sorry, Chris,
Yeah.
before I'll just add, while we're talking, we don't know exactly who's in the audience and like where everyone's coming from, but there's obviously different types of housing co-ops that we can be talking about. And I guess right now I'm kind of answering the question from the perspective of a small group of people who have bought a small building or a house. And those are usually the folks that reach out to us that are trying to start their own housing cooperative. Of course, you can have like large apartment complexes that are like professionally managed. And the way that's getting developed is like a very different starting point. It's often starting with a developer that wants to create cooperative housing. And of course, the rocks are their own thing. And usually the rocks are an instance where the park tenants are organizing to buy a park where they've already been living and maybe already have those relationships. So I guess I'm just naming that, maybe we should be clear about what type of model we're talking about in terms of
Right.
our recommendations, because it will vary depending on what the housing type is.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great, Craig. And actually, apart from rocks, and Pat, I'll let you take it next. The model you're describing, Craig, is the most common that I see when folks come for financing is buying a house together, in kind of that very informal startup kind of situation. So yeah, Pat, take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, so our experience with first year communities kind of mirrors a bit of what Craig mentioned. However, our model, so to speak, we are affiliated with a national organization called Rock USA. So I won't call it a co-op in a box, but we have materials from them around training, and the first year is very intensive. And to your point, Craig, it is not generally a small, like a few folks getting together. One of our largest community right now that we've converted is in Brunswick, Maine, Blueberry Fields, and there were 275 households there. So it is very intense in the first year. It's not uncommon to have 2 to 3 meetings a month with the board, with membership and whatnot. But basically, in that cooperative model, we take them through the process and hopefully set them up for success in that first year by extensive training with the materials that we sometimes develop ourselves, but also a lot does come down from our national affiliate, Rock USA. Um, I think, and Craig, because your co-ops are a bit smaller, one of the things we do focus on extensively is good board one-on-one training. So we are going to take an hour a month to sit with the board president and just review what's going on with the co-op and coach them and give them good technical advice. But we do that with every board position because unlike a worker cooperative, we are many times dealing with people that might not have ever touched a set of books in their life, and now all of a sudden they're a treasurer. So we have good trainings in place to help them with that, so they can review their monthly finances appropriately and bring a good financial report to that monthly board meeting. Um, you mentioned, Craig, trust, and that is so important. So when our communities reach out to us, they trust that we're going to react, we're going to give them the information they need and be a strong presence for them, especially in the first year. So.
Great, thanks, Pat. Yeah, Julian.
Yeah. Yeah, I can be brief. I mean, I think the things that I would add partly is just to underscore some of the things that were said, but maybe come about it from the standpoint of that initial energy when you are starting a co-op. I mean, it's great, right? It's like you have this goal. And typically you've got both a few people that are really doing a lot of the work and have that energy or maybe just even capacity and can show up. But you've got good momentum, hopefully, from the whole community. And I think it's really important um, to really move from that place. So like Craig was talking about, even if it's social events, it's an opportunity. This is an opportunity to really get people more invested in each other and where they're living, because you're going to need that in the long run. And similarly, what Pat was saying, just around skill building and training, and for probably most people there, this is totally something new. Looking at bylaws and the finances, and you want to make sure that you don't just have one person that's capable of that, because inevitably there's going to be turnover, or that person, something happens in their life and they need to step back. You want to have people that are in those rooms and are being trained also, so they can step up when they need. Because if you don't, you have one person step back and then you have a vacuum, and it can and hinder sort of what you're trying to do. So yeah, one recommendation is to have multiple people that are being trained and ready to step up. And also, it's a lot of effort early on. So that group who puts a lot of effort in the first or second year, it would make sense if they just it's a lot for them and they need to take a break from it, right? So be prepared to have another wave of people that have maybe been coming to these social events, and that you can invite them into more leadership when that time comes. Um, yeah, I think those are the things I would say.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I wanted to go a little bit into kind of the co-op side of things, cooperative, like why are we doing this? And a lot of co-op type stuff really boils down to, the difference between an apartment building and a landlord situation, or even a condo situation. It's really about governance and who's leading and making decisions. And so my next question, and Pat, I'll let you kick us off, is really around what are some best, you touched on it a little bit, I think already, sort of board training and that sort of thing. What are some good just practices, and take this wherever you'd like, around the governance piece of this and decision making, um, for folks who probably, like you said, maybe may not have been on nonprofit boards before or had not been in leadership positions before, and particularly around, and Julian, you mentioned it, it's inevitable that conflicts will happen, and people will leave. And so really around that situation of thinking about, beyond the 6 months, eventually everybody's not going to be happy 2 years from now, and or somebody's going to leave. And that means, one, is there's an impact of that person leaving, and then the other impact is we need to bring somebody new in. So yeah, take it away from there, I guess, Pat, and we'll go around. Thanks.
Okay, great. Uh, Especially in the first year, and hopefully continually, it's really important to encourage membership to attend the board meetings, because those are your next board leaders. So it is very normal to have a lot of excitement, as Julian talked about, that first year and that momentum, and then have things peter off. Um, but trying to keep that steady engagement is so important for the board and the membership. And when when a member attends a board meeting, they are seeing democracy in action. They're seeing the issues being discussed publicly, just like a town meeting. They're hearing the discussion from their board members, and hopefully a respectful discussion, but then a vote being cast. If there's an issue that's on the agenda, the board works through it, discusses it, and then we'll call for a vote. At their annual meeting every year, that is probably one of the most important things a non-board member can attend, because that is their meeting. It is the membership meeting. So things that have accumulated or maybe been raised up during the course of their first year can be addressed and discussed openly. At that annual meeting, there'll be votes for the membership to vote. They have to vote on their budget every year. And they have to vote if somebody brought forth a proposal to do something different in their community. Maybe somebody wants to build a playground. Well, that comes in front of the membership, because when they became a cooperative, they might not have had a playground. So any alteration of the community, any improvement, basically has to come before membership. The membership, the board, gets to create their own set of community rules. So many of these rocks that we convert were, I don't want to use the word tyrant, but they were under very strict community rules sometimes. And there was no freedom to maybe change things or create something different for their community. So by becoming resident owned, they come together and they can create a new beginning, which is personally something that really excites me in the work I do. And they work to make their community better. So yeah, so governance, sticking to a monthly board meeting is so important. Following your own policies, your own rules as a community, having respectful meetings. These are all things we train on and encourage the communities we serve to follow. So.
Thanks, Pat. Julian, yeah, why don't you take it?
Sure. Yeah. Just building on that, maybe just drilling down a little bit to things like the importance of transparency, right? Building trust, for example. So even things like making sure your board secretary is taking good board meeting minutes feels like a small thing, but actually is a big thing in that first year, building those good practices. But right, we're coming into a situation where if most people, if you're like me, you've been renting and you typically have this, somewhat unfortunately antagonistic maybe relationship with the owner, right? And so it's also, we, in being a part of a co-op, we all have to relearn. Oh, now we're the owners. It's not somebody else there. It's your neighbor who's on the board, or could be you. So but that kind of expectation of an antagonism probably may still be there. So all the ways in which you can build trust, so transparency around meeting minutes, or notices, posting notices on time, or just slowing down around parts of your bylaws or community agreements so that there's understanding, and posting all of that stuff. I feel like small things, but go to build that trust and shift that dynamic between, residents and their, now what they own collectively, feels important. Having support too, training. I mean, both Craig and Pat like do work supporting communities and boards, but having somebody else there, and I saw in the chat too around, if you need mediation support, or having board training TA there to guide through. Sometimes even just having somebody that's not a part of the community that can come in, that's, um, and is really helpful in those first few years, certainly, because there's a lot of experience out there. This has happened before, and also every community will be its own thing, but there's a lot of great best practices to move from. Yeah, I think that's what I would, in terms of governance early on.
Thanks. Yeah, Craig.
One thing I'll highlight that I think helps with governance is housing cooperatives are already complex. Sort of by their nature, there's a complexity to them that takes time to learn and adjust to. So to the extent that you have a choice in the matter, choose simplicity. When you're writing your bylaws, when you're coming up with solutions to challenges, the more simple you can make, the way something is written and documented, and the more simple you can make the thing when it's an action that needs to be followed through by, your decision makers or individual members. The easier it is, the easier it will be to actually implement. Just to give an example, for housing co-ops that are using the limited equity model, and you have a limited equity formula, you want to make that simple in some way. If it involves, well, there's two different ways to make it simple, basically. Either you sort of come up with your formula and you do all the complicated math like once, and then you've got a table that you can just refer to, and you say what year, what month is it, here's what a share is worth, and the limited equity formula is just pointing to the number. That's one way of achieving simplicity. The other way you achieve it is just by making the formula itself very simple. Like it's just going to go up 3% every year, or it's going to go up based on inflation, and here's the exact the way you calculate inflation, something like that. Because when you take complexity in terms of how you govern, or how you implement something, and then add it to what might be a point of conflict, then things get really hard. And that, the trust and the transparency start to break down because folks are losing confidence in your systems themselves, because they're hard to understand or follow, and that makes them either actually more open to manipulation or just open to error. So definitely trend towards simple. And I would say I would include that with kind of getting back to I guess the point I was making about like the way you form community. At a minimum, housing cooperatives offer an economic structure for folks to pool resources and like control their housing together. And that in and of itself, I think, is a huge achievement. And there's a lot of potential for people to grow in their economic security, in their social relationships from that alone. And again, speaking from experience, and when we started our housing cooperative, we went in with a lot of ideas about like the social components of what we wanted to achieve. And I think that's all good and like worth holding. But at the same time, with this point about simplicity, try to be careful about being overly ambitious in like how many social outcomes you're trying to dictate through your housing cooperative, in terms of particularly in terms of how like other people live. Maybe let's see, can I give it a good example as far as that goes? I mean, like really basic stuff is just like, we're going to compost and we're going to recycle, like great. But, when you get into more things around healthy living, smoking, like stuff that starts to feel like it encroaches on other people's like personal livelihoods, like you need to negotiate that, but just be careful about how many things you're sort of going out of the gate with, in terms of like, this co-op is going to achieve all this stuff and people who live here are going to like have to do all these things. I think that something that is kind of impossible to control for when you're starting a brand new housing co-op is you're going in with a lot of dreams, and you're coming together with people who maybe you know well, maybe you don't know as well, but you probably have not lived together as intimately as you're going to be in the small housing co-op model. And it's really eye-opening how even people who feel like they have very similar lives to you may have just very different, lifestyles. And you learn that through the process of living together. And it's hard in the initial year or two. You're learning a lot about how you're going to live together, and you kind of can't predetermine it. Once you get through that first year or two and you start to develop a culture, and some people will move out who are not, happy with the arrangement, and new people will move in. And then I think when you start to get that next wave, it's really important to set expectations well, in terms of, what the co-op can offer, what it cannot. And I think doing a good interview, an application process, setting up expectations, so that folks know what they're agreeing to, what they're committed to, and what is theirs to choose, will go a long way in helping set you up for good communication, good transparency, and good problem solving, conflict. Resolution almost feels like maybe a misnomer. A lot of conflicts never feel entirely resolved, but in terms of managing the conflict, the better you can set up the expectations of the next wave of folks moving in, that will, help set you up in the long term for greater sustainability. But there is just a lot of learning that the founders are going to go through, and that's kind of inevitable.
Awesome. Thanks, Craig. I'm gonna turn the conversation to the nuts and bolts of like managing a building. And Julian, I'm gonna let you kick it off, having been a manager yourself. And the two main areas that I always think of and run into with the housing co-ops we work with are, how are you managing your finances, collections, paying bills, and how are you planning for and taking care of maintenance, both the short term, day-to-day stuff and the big stuff, like we got to replace the roof in 2 years. And best practices, but also you all kind of represent three kinds of models. Although Craig, you've evolved. One is starting out as volunteer and everybody's doing it and pitching in to do it together. Pat often rocks, and please talk about it, do hire a property manager, a third party. And Julian, you were literally sort of an in-house manager in your apartment. So yeah, take it away. And Julian, why don't you kick us off on that one?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, I feel like Craig and Pat have a lot more of like recent experience to draw from. So I'll try to be short and just like, maybe I'll just focus on two things. One, on the finance side, I would say the co-op that I grew up at, again, almost 50 years old now, has been successful in part because they put something aside for their reserves. They just kept doing that. Even if it was a little bit, they made sure that that was something that they were thinking about. I understand not every group is in a position to do that, um, but eventually for Beecher Cooperative, those over years, those reserves became strong, and they were able to make larger, capital investments, or do a big repair, or replace roofing, or when they needed to, and then the smaller things, we tried to empower residents, and do little trainings of the small repairs that individuals could do around their units, which also sort of cut down our costs, when people knew how to do some of the smaller things. Also building relationships too with contractors, as a manager, was really helpful. So that there are people locally that I could call on really quickly to come and triage something, or that knew our residents and knew our buildings well. Save some costs there, but making all of those relationships, with people who could do that work, felt important. And then on the yeah, I think those are the big, pieces. Both reserves, don't forget about your reserves, and that eventually will matter. And then also, making sure to source. I mean, one, like, know all of the deferred maintenance things that you're walking into, if that's something. So just being really clear and sober about that. Um, and yeah, and I mean, for me, just managing those buildings, it was important to like have great relationships with local contractors that I could call whenever I needed to. Those are two things that came to mind, but yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Craig.
Sorry, I was responding to a message in the chat. Can you remind me what the question is?
Sure. Actually, Pat, why don't you take it from here? And Craig, this is around just nuts and bolts, financial management and maintenance and capital planning and all that, taking care of the building. But yeah, Pat, why don't you go ahead? No worries, Craig.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure. Basically, in our learnings here in NEROC in the state of Maine, we did not have rocks that technically had property management. They had a bookkeeper, for lack of a better term. So thankfully, all the rocks now have officially property management, and it has been a game changer. It's so important, in my opinion, in the cooperative housing model, at least in the rock world, to have that. Because when a board member or working collectively as a board would send a rule violation, that is neighbor against neighbor. Now that rule violation can come from their official property management company. So you're taking out the personal around that, and that makes for better relations in the cooperative, in my opinion. As far as capital improvement plans, now this is again just in the rock model. When a community I like to say when a rock is born. When a rock is born, one of the things they're given is a 10-year capital improvement plan based on the extensive engineering work that was done at time of acquisition. So that has to be looked at every year and considered when they do make their budget. They have their regular operating budget, and then they will have their capital improvement budget. And to Julian's point, absolutely, reserves are crucial. And our model, and I'm sure, Craig, your model as well, any good housing cooperative needs uh, tremendous reserves, or at least a plan to create great reserves. But all that said, you can have the best plan going forward and an estimate like maybe in year 5 that leach field is replaced. Well, maybe in year 2 that leach field decides we're not going to continue to work. So that kind of throws a boomerang at things, and the community has to come together. And ideally, if a grant can be found, terrific. But if not, we'll have to go to people like Chris Linder and present the case of here's what's happened. The community does not have enough reserves, unfortunately, because a leach field failed 3 years prior to when we thought it would. So, but property management, in my opinion, is key. Good property management and a very strong capital improvement plan that the community looks at least once a year.
That's great. Yeah, and I've even heard of folks like hiring an inspector to come back in every couple of years and doing it. Yeah, Craig, take it away. And just one additive question to you is when might be the good time to go from we manage it all ourselves to hiring a property manager? Because I think you've gone through that sort of phase.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, so yeah, it definitely makes, like, if you're going to be a small housing co-op, then you're going to be managing the property yourself. Small being if it's a single family house, where people are leasing bedrooms, or a small building like I think once you're starting to get above 9 or 10 living units, 9 or 10 apartments, then you're starting to get into the gray area of you kind of need some professional property management, but you also don't have that much money or scale to afford one. So that's kind of a tough area. Of course, once you're getting to like 20 units or more, I think needing to have like professionals providing property management services for you is essential. And of course, that can be in-house. You can have staff in-house, or you can hire property management. In the case of the raise op, so we were self-managed. We were doing everything ourselves for the first 5 years. When we started to expand, we had one staff person. Today, we have two staff people. We still have, like, I guess when we started, we would just call up whatever trades person we needed when we needed them. When we once we started to grow, now we have like a maintenance contract with an organization locally called Community Concepts. So we have an arrangement with them where they're just on call for both regular maintenance needs and emergency maintenance needs. And we set up a system where people can enter their maintenance request and get the thing done, and then we get it paid for. And that relationship has worked out really well. I think if you're a small housing co-op, you don't, both in terms of cost, but also like the sense of autonomy you want over your home, you probably don't want the property manager intervening. The good bookkeeping is important, so you get the training if you're going to do that yourself. And I think it can be helpful. Now there's better options than we had when we started in terms of automating in like invoicing. Like now we're able to use QuickBooks, and every month all of our members get an invoice, and the invoice is documenting, like the invoice actually does a lot of the accounting for us, and people can pay it online. You can see instantly who's paid. If you're a small co-op, maybe you're making that completely transparent, or maybe it's just the treasurer that sees it. But at any rate, you need to set up, a good system of rent collection. And now technology makes that it gives you more options in terms of how you do that. And for I mean, folks have made good points about the importance of having routine to inspections and capital improvement plans. When you're just getting started as a small co-op, you're going to be working off of that initial inspection report for a certain period of time, and then just like your direct observations. A capital improvement plan is valuable. They can also be a little strange. I'll point out, like sometimes you have to combine your lived knowledge of your property with what a capital improvement plan tells you, because sometimes it'll tell you that you need to replace things that are working fine just because they've technically reached the end of their useful life. Like the drywall is 20 years old, so you need to replace it. Well, the drywall's fine, it's a dry wall. But So there's a combination of just, what you observe needs to be done to merge with what outside expertise tells you. But a very important piece of advice that I give anyone who's asking, really form good relationships with your with tradespeople, with your plumbers, electricians, pay them on time, value their labor, because there's a huge shortage of them. Like I hate to say like we're at their mercy, but aside from the fact that you should just respect their professional trade, and this is not to say that you should let anyone take advantage of you, but I think in general you need them more than they need you in terms of where the market is right now. So when you have someone that is consistent, that answers the phone and is reliable and does a good job, um, be nice to them and be a good customer, and you want them to want to serve you, and don't take that relationship for granted, because it's not, when it comes to it's not as simple as going online and shopping for the cheapest best thing that you want. That's not the way the contracting stuff works, particularly if you're talking about small jobs where it's not, if you're doing like $100 million development, then yeah, you can get really like aggressive and competitive bidding. But when you're talking about like you just need someone to respond and fix the toilet, um, if someone's willing to do that for you, then you need to value that and preserve that relationship for the benefit of your co-op.
Awesome. Thanks, Craig. We're getting close to time, so I'm going to switch up a little bit and answer some of the questions in the chat really quickly, and then leave the last word to you all. One of the questions was, can housing co-ops work on tribal lands? And Craig, you rightly mentioned, in general, housing co-ops can work on leased land, and a very common model is land trust on the bottom, housing co-ops on the top. So definitely yes. And as Craig mentioned, we've been in talks with Four Directions, another nonprofit lender like us in economic development, who are very interested in that model. And in general, I think what's most important is less about the legal entity and really about, at least from our perspective, who's in control and who gets a say in the housing. And so as long as the residents have most and much of the say in what's happening in that building, or like a rock type situation, that's really what's the most important part. And it matters less of what you call it or what the legal entity is. And so that's kind of our perspective on it, is what, how are you operating? It matters more than kind of what you are. And then somebody asked about a board training. It will be in the resource document, but the National Association of Housing Co-ops has a really good board training that I took, and they will do it for small groups, and they do cover property manager. And actually, the trainer that I had was a property manager for large-ish housing co-ops in Connecticut, so I enjoyed it. And then just any last words, I guess, from Craig, Julian, or Pat, in if anybody wanted to, yeah, any last things before we have to go, because we're right at the hour. Yeah.
I'll say, if I may, thank you for the opportunity today. Thank you to Emmy for organizing this. And I want to thank the state of Maine. The governor's office of policy has been outstanding. I want to thank Chris, your organization, CFNE, Genesis, other CDFIs that are such great partners, our fellow partners here today. Craig is an awesome resource. We are so fortunate to live in the state of Maine and have such a collaborative vibe. And it's a pleasure to work in the state and do this work. So thank you to all that participate.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, just thank you. Yeah, excited. And if you're here, just glad that you're interested in housing co-ops. It's both not easy and so critically important. And so yeah, and you've got great resources here in the state, many people in this room, so reach out.
Awesome, Craig.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversation today. I'll take a moment just to plug some of our programs a little bit more because we haven't advertised them much yet. So in addition to just general technical support with kind of any aspect of cooperative housing that folks are looking for, we have some specific programs for the startup phase. So for low income led housing cooperatives in Maine, we have a $5,000 grant that you can apply for, and that's on our website. I think Emmy linked to the page on our website where you can request technical support. We also are offering a pre-development loan guarantee. We don't offer the loan, but we will guarantee a loan up to a limit for pre-development costs for new housing cooperatives. So if you are interested in that, in addition to just general support, whether it's with startup or operation, please reach out, complete the form on our website, and we'd be happy to talk to you more.
Awesome. Thank you all. Thanks to the panelists and Emmy and John Crane helping on the back end. So just some reminders, please. There will be a link. Thank you to so Emmy just put up the link to the next session that will be our last session around inspiring stories and kind of how housing co-ops fit in Maine in the current situation for affordable housing, but also what it can be. Julian mentioned living in DC. There are communities where housing co-ops are much more common. And I think all of us would love to see more. So we're going to talk about kind of what the future could be next week on the 29th, same hour, same just a week from today. Also, please don't, there's also a link for a survey for you all to take. Please do take that. It should be really fast. And then just a reminder, Emmy will send all the resources that were mentioned, plus some additional ones, and the recording. So this has been recorded. So I will stop there. Thank you all for a great session and really appreciate it. And I'm excited for next week as well. Take care.